For those of you who are new, at least new to me, y'all might have been here before when I wasn't here, but many of you in the room are new to me today. So let me take a moment to introduce myself and let you all know what we've been up to for the past 9 months. My name is Rick Busby. I'm a licensed Unity teacher. My home church is in the Austin area, Unity Church of the Hills. Our particular church is also a resource and educational center. We do a lot of the certified classes and everything for people who are on the Unity teacher path or just on the spiritual enlightenment path and personal development. So I teach year-round, I speak in churches year-round, play music, and so forth. This past year, I had set a commitment for myself at the beginning of the year to write a book over the course of the year. And I'm basing the core of that book around the 12 powers that Charles Fillmore articulated in the Unity teachings. So far, let me recap and kind of bring y'all current. In January, we talked about the power of will. The power of will is our executive power. Whatever the will decides to do, even if it's not in our best interest, all the other powers have to go along with it. If the will is choosing in a direction that is not in our best interest, we can animate our other powers to kind of bring it back, keep it between the lines, so to speak. That's where the power of love comes in handy, for example. The power of love is our harmonizing power. When in the midst of chaos or dissonance and things of that nature, any kind of challenges or impediments, bringing love to the equation helps to harmonize all the events, pulls them together. The power of faith, we talked about it in March, and the power of faith, metaphysically, Unity looks at it a little bit differently than traditional orientations would. We see faith as the perceiving power. And by that we mean that it's the ability to see without any evidence that there's anything in manifestation, but to see the underlying spiritual principles that are available to manifest good, and then to move forward with that in faith. Because you see something that doesn't yet exist in physical form. Now, faith works closely with the power of imagination, which we talked about in April. And the power of imagination is like the language of the subconscious, if you will. It's kind of the projecting power. If faith is the perceiving power, its linkage to the power of imagination is like a projection screen. It starts bringing these ideas into form before they're in form by putting color, texture, sense. You know, if you're writing a song, for example, you're working on getting rhythm and melody and harmony and those kinds of things in there. That all happens in the imagination before the physical manifestation. In May, we talked about the power of power. The power of power is located, Charles focuses that right here in our throat region, which is associated, of course, with our voice. And if you think about in the creative sense, in the creation story, the whole universe gets kicked off with, let there be light, that sound. Even in the Hindu traditions and everything, they talk about sound, the sound of Brahma, emitting a sound of a vowel into this golden embryo, and as the sound vibrations bounce back off the wall, it put into force the creation story in the Hindu mythologies as well. So there's always this idea of sound. This is where all of our powers come together right here, and whatever we speak, we're going to follow. If you say, I am less than, I am unworthy, well, guess what? You're going to get the experience of feeling unworthy because that's what you're affirming for yourself. And the power of power is how we do that. So a big part, in my estimation, a big part of spiritual growth and spiritual development is learning to re-language how you speak about your circumstances, how you speak about your life, how you speak about yourself. It's an inside job, and it can be subtle. It can be subtle as this. I had a response Thursday night to the World Day of Prayer. Someone came up and gave a demonstration using the Ho'oponopono prayer. Do y'all know that one? It's a Hawaiian tradition. Yeah. I am sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. Right? Sounds innocuous enough. But if you sit in a space where you use that as a mantra over and over and over, what you're affirming to yourself is, I am sorry. Now, there's one level where we're sort of making an apology with that, but if you affirm it enough, you believe you're less than. The second phase of that comes in and says, please forgive me. It's coming from a pleading place, almost kind of a desperate, codependent energy, if you will. Please forgive me. I need your forgiveness, or I'm not going to be at peace. As we learn in other places about forgiveness Forgiveness is your job. Your self-forgiveness is way more important than getting someone else's forgiveness. I don't have to wait on someone else's forgiveness in order to get myself back to peace. So as I sat through that Ho'oponopono, I was like, that I'm sorry thing is really bothering me. It's really bothering me. I will apologize. I will apologize. I will express regret or remorse over guilt that I have earned. If I have done something in error that is fouled on somebody, instead of saying I'm sorry, which does further energetic damage, I would say I apologize and do my best to make those amends. Power of power. If my whole ministry and my whole message is about one thing, it's about the power of our voice. It's about finding your voice, finding your authority. So power of power is very important in my sort of creative cosmology, as it were. In June, we talked about the spiritual power of law and order. Okay, law and spiritual power of order, as Charles articulates it, is a prioritizing power. Prioritizing power. Even more so than that, the spiritual power of law and order reveals and recognizes the underlying truth of spiritual principle. Like if my life is out of whack, if I'm not getting the results I want, chances are very high that I'm out of alignment with spiritual principle. I am misusing it, misunderstanding it, misdirecting it, call it what you will, but it's my responsibility to get back in alignment. The universe may send me some troubling signs along the way to kind of force me back into the path, or at least give me signals that I should be back in the path. But as I said about the will a while ago, if I'm choosing to go against God's urgings and everything, I'm going to get the experience I'm going to get. And good case in point about this, yesterday morning, yesterday, I was excited about going to the Astros game yesterday in Houston. And I woke up in the middle of the night I've been waking up around 1 o'clock almost every night now, and then I'm up for like 2 hours. So I read, and I was like, all right, what am I going to read? I had a bunch of things that I'm in the middle of reading that I could have reached for. But I said, I'm going to open up my Kindle here, and I'm going to pull up the Bible, and I'm going to look at the table of contents, and I'm going to read something that I don't normally read. And I was drawn to read the book of Jonah, which was relatively short. You can read that in about 10, 15 minutes, if that. So, dive in. But the story of Jonah is a great story to reveal to what we're getting ready to set up here today about the power of judgment. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. But basically the idea is that God asked Jonah to go speak to the Ninevites. And Jonah didn't like the Ninevites. I don't want to go talk to the Ninevites. So Jonah goes trying to run away from God's urging here. And he starts heading out for Joppa, and he hops a ship on the way to Tarshish. Jonah is very passive on the ship here. He's just going like a passenger. There's other people running the ship, and the ship starts running into all kinds of stormy water, and Jonah just continues to be asleep as all this is going on. And finally, because they believed in the gods, and they believed that the sea was troubled because there was something wrong with their energy, they sought on the ship to find out what was going wrong. What do we need to correct so that we can calm these storms? And they learned that Jonah was running away from God. So they threw him off the ship. Threw him off the ship. That's when he was scooped up in the belly of the whale, the belly of the fish, however you want to look at it, where he stayed for 3 days until God urged the fish to throw him up on the beach. So Jonah makes his way back home and then finally relents and goes and speaks to the Ninevites. And when he did, it ushered in a whole big renaissance in Ninevite consciousness to where they all repented. And when they repented, God forgave them, which irritated Jonah. Why are you forgiving them? Well, that was the whole purpose, Jonah, for me to send you there to give them testimony so that it would bring about a renaissance in their consciousness. That was the whole objective of the thing. So Jonah kind of went through that whole experience, kicking and screaming and running and trying to be in denial and then judging God for doing what he thought God shouldn't have done. I mean, think about it. Have you ever done that? Yeah. I know I have. I have been Jonah. I have been Jonah. And that's one of the most exciting aspects to me about Unity teachings and the metaphysics of it and everything, is that before I became a licensed Unity teacher, I didn't really have a good relationship with biblical literature. I love the Gospels. I've always, no matter what stage of protest I've ever been at in my life, I always loved the Gospels, and in particular, the words in red. The ones that they attributed to Jesus. And in particular, I've been enamored by the one that says, what I can do, you can do. In fact, you'll do greater things. And that, to me, is what the purpose of the 12 powers is all about. That the same powers that were inherent in Jesus, the same connection to divine knowledge. If you really pay attention to it, it amazes me sometimes that Christians can be judgmental, and we're going to be getting to judgment here in just a few minutes, that Christians could even be judgmental because Jesus never took credit for anything. They're judgmental in Jesus' name, and Jesus was always pointing the way back to the one teacher, as the meditation song says. Even the Christ has the same one teacher that you and I each have. And all the people outside these walls have the same one teacher, regardless of what mythology, regardless of what religious traditions we come from. At the end of the day, when you distill down all the creative details of the different mythologies, we're going to get down to spiritual principle. And the spiritual principle of the universe is creative and dynamic. It is not static and unchanging. And yet many of our religious traditions have us locked into transcripts and books and everything from the past as if all the truth that ever needed to be said was distilled down to this. And we're only, sort of worshiping in retrospect. Well, I don't know about y'all, but I don't have any evidence whatsoever. I don't see any evidence anywhere. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you've got an idea, I'm open to hearing about it. But I don't see any evidence whatsoever that God has ever rested. That the activity of the universe is ongoing, perpetually active. And if it's continuing, if trees are continuing to grow, and children are continuing to be born, and songs are continuing to be written, God is still active. So why would we want to study something God said 5,000 years ago as opposed to what God's saying to us right now? That makes sense? Yep. Am I off my rocker here?
Nope.
All right. So let's move forward now. That was a whole lot to say about the power of order, but it's important to the conversation about judgment as well. Quickly in July, we talked about the power of renunciation, which is the power of elimination. It's the power to say no in order to say yes. If something is in your life, in your experience, that is hindering, limiting, impeding you manifesting more good in your life, you manifesting more of your potential, you have a power to say no to that agent, whatever it is. It could be a relationship, could be a drug, could be a food, could be just, I am unworthy, over and over and over. You need to say no to that because that's not God's impression of who you are. So you want to believe your own limited impression of it, or do we want to have a more magnificent view of who we are? So power of renunciation, very powerful, and not one of the sexy powers, by the way, so people don't give it a lot of shrift a lot of times. It's like, I'd rather work with love and imagination and faith and everything as opposed to renunciation. Renunciation is so important because renunciation removes the blocks to our awareness of God's presence. Last month we talked about the power of spiritual understanding, and spiritual understanding and judgment, which we're talking about today, are so closely intertwined that the purpose of this discussion is to try and tease out the understandings between them. Last month, as a reminder, when we talked about spiritual understanding, I told you that it's often confused with knowledge, knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. And we talked about why those things are different than actually what understanding is. And as a power, as a creative power, a faculty that we have to express our potential, the power of understanding is an intuitive power. The power of judgment, which we're talking about today, is a rational, intellectual power. It's a sorting out. It's yes, no, 0, 1, black, white, good, bad, true, false. That's what the power of judgment does. It's sort and put things in categories. But the power of judgment has no capacity to figure out what all that means. It needs the power of spiritual understanding working with it, because this power of spiritual understanding connects us to the field of divine intelligence through an intuitive path. Have you ever had an experience where you're talking with someone, you're having a great discussion, it's a live discussion, you're talking about lofty ideals, you might even be ministering to somebody who's suffering and you're the person that's there with them. And you have a moment in an experience where you hear yourself saying something to this person that you know you've never articulated yourself before, you've never really said it, but you recognize that something is moving through you and that it's the most important thing that you've ever said in that moment. But you don't know where it's coming from? Everybody had that?
Yeah.
That's when you're tapped into the power of spiritual understanding. So now you know what that feels like. That's when you were tapped into the field of divine intelligence, all knowledge, and you're out of your own way enough to allow it to come through.
Yeah, out of the way.
Right on?
Out of the way.
Okay. So judgment. That brings us to judgment. Boy, is there a more loaded word in the Christian context? I don't know of one. Charles titles his chapter, he uses judgment and wisdom. Okay? And in passing, people use the word discernment to evoke this power as well. I'm going to make a quick case with y'all, and to do that, I'm going to refer to some notes here because I want to talk about the specific definitions of these three words: judgment, wisdom, and discernment. And let's see if we can kind of come to a consensus as to which one is the most powerful for us. Whoops, on the wrong app here. All right, so here we go. Judgment, we'll do judgment first. And judgment, as if you look up the dictionary, you're going to find three primary meanings for judgment. Okay? The ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. We'll come back to this one in a minute because that's a real important one. The second one is judgment is the actual opinion or conclusion itself. In other words, in the judgment of the court, right? There's that judgment, there's that opinion, that statement that the judgment is now the actual opinion, in fact, that's coming out, not the critical evaluation power that we're talking about. And the last one is a misfortune of calamity viewed as a divine punishment. Anybody ever heard of God's judgment? Final judgment? Those make y'all feel warm and cozy, right? So I think the word judgment has some problems, connotatively speaking, that keeps us from actually seizing the intention of the power behind it. Because the power of judgment is a very, very vital power. But once again, like will, it needs to work. Well, actually, all the powers need to work in coordination with all the other powers. But judgment, if it's divorced from all the other powers, just like will, it can go off the rails really quickly. Because we have this capacity that in the moment that we're judging something, we believe we're perfect judges. And therefore, whatever conclusions we reach, they must be the truth. And if you don't believe that, just get on a Facebook news feed and listen to the conversation between your Democratic friends and your Republican friends. And you will find real quickly that everybody has a confirmation bias. What I mean by that is this, is that once you have decided, and as we get older, we've already made a bunch of decisions, haven't we? We already kind of know what our cosmological view is. Certain things are set in stone. And we're not looking for information that's going to overturn that belief system.
No.
We're only looking for information that confirms our already pre-existing bias towards a certain way of looking at the world.
That's right.
Now, once again, this is not something that only Democrats do, and it's not something that only Republicans do. Everybody does it. No matter how good your intentions are, you must be aware in your own consciousness that in you sorting out your own truth and you making judgments over the course of your lifetime as to what is true and what is not, what is good, what is bad, what is beneficial, what is detrimental, all these categories that we've got, we've been doing that all of our lives.
Right.
And we've been on a search for truth, haven't we? In one way or the other, we've been on a search for truth. But whose truth? Your truth, my truth, God's truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Which truth are we looking for? Spiritual discernment is defined as the ability to judge well. It's already a qualitative word. I think the intention of the power of judgment, because we can demonstrate good judgment and bad judgment, can't we? So is this definition actually correct? That judgment is the ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. Is that definition correct as a word for judgment? It's not, otherwise we would only make good judgments. There would never be any bad judgments, would there? Okay? Now Charles, and even Eric Butterworth, who is my very, very favorite unity writer. I love Eric Butterworth's work. He's done a lot to change my internal consciousness. However, he and Charles talk about this power that we're talking about as wisdom also. And I'm advocating the case that wisdom is not a power. Wisdom is a consequence, an effect that is derived from operating in alignment with my 12 powers, and therefore I'm acting wisely as an integration of all the 12 powers, not a separate power. You can't say I am wising. You can say I am imagining, I am loving, I am ordering, I am understanding, I am judging, I am discerning. You can't say I am wising. It's not an active power. It's a condition. It's closer in line. Actually, what Charles says about wisdom is that wisdom is above all the 12 powers. Okay? I think he used the word wisdom just because it was a good word. But I think the word discernment is a more accurate word for what he's trying to get at. That if we're in alignment with this power, then we are judging well. We are judging rightly. We are testing all of our assumptions and all of our truths against some sort of objective, as best we can, against some objective truth. And that objective truth shows up in the form of knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. Charles places wisdom above all, and that knowledge and intelligence are like auxiliary to that. We were talking about the spiritual understanding a moment ago, that in spiritual understanding, when we're in that intuitive thing, we're connected to that field of knowledge, we're connected to that field of intelligence. And if we operate in that space, we will be wise. We will act wisely because we're allowing this other truth beyond our opinions, beyond our limited perceptions, to come in and have an influence over what we're thinking, or saying, or doing. Would you agree?
Yes.
But it's a high degree of personal responsibility, isn't it?
Yes.
Taking charge of your peace, taking charge of the creative quality of your own life, it requires a high degree of personal responsibility. You have these powers, I have these powers, and these are the same powers that Jesus and any other ascended master that we can point to in the history of time has also had access to these same powers. Doesn't matter our race, color, sex, whatever, we're all infused with that same divine life intelligence. There is no opposing power. There is no opposing power. What we call evil in the world, what we judge as evil in the world, is simply people misusing spiritual principle. You see, principle, this is the part, once again, where it's a high degree of personal responsibility. Principle is unattached to whether you use it for good or for bad. Unattached, has no opinion. Has no opinion. If you put your hand in a burning fire, you are going to get burned. If you didn't have the spiritual understanding or just the life understanding not to put your hand in there, then the spiritual principle operates without prejudice. So if we're going to get to a place to where we are collectively operating without prejudice, and bigotry and racism and all the isms that we rail against are kind of neutralized, then we are the ones that have to do it. It cannot be legislated. It's a matter of consciousness. And I can't change 7 billion people on the planet's mind, and neither can you. But I can change my mind. That is absolutely in my executive management control. To change my mind. We're all moving through the same world, as it were. The people who are committed to peace and creativity and love and things like that see the world much differently than those that are, focused on war and chaos and, ignorance, whatever you want to call it. See, to me, I'm a big fan of Unity Principle number 5, which basically says that all this stuff I'm telling you right now, all the Unity Principles, Jesus' story, any of that, none of it means anything. Has no meaning, no value, no power whatsoever unless I'm willing to live the truth I know. A lot of times we come here on Sunday and we get fed, we get the education, it kind of comes in. I think our spiritual growth a lot of times takes a lot longer than it actually needs to because of our unwillingness. I got to let go of these beliefs. I don't know what that's going to look like if I let go of these beliefs. What am I going to be left with? But that's where God wants you, is out on the skinny limbs. You need to be climbing that tree. You need to be out in the skinny limbs, because that's when you know you have to be dependent upon the spiritual truth of the universe. Right?
Right.
So wisdom is this body of knowledge, right? So wisdom says the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. It's a quality of being wise. It's not an actual power. You demonstrate wisdom by being wise. And that's not an independent power. That's why I think the spiritual power of discernment is a more accurate description for the power that we're talking about here. Because that implies an ability to judge, to evaluate, and analyze rightly, to do it well, which means that you're doing it in awareness of your alignment with principle. So we talked about confirmation bias. Does everybody get that concept? Or we get that we do it, and it's not judgmental, it's that we do it, but we're either doing it consciously or unconsciously. And if you have been doing it unconsciously up until today, I apologize for bringing it to your awareness. It's doing it. You'll think about this as the week goes on. You'll catch yourself in a situation where you go, oh wow, I saw the lure, I almost took the bait, but get that hook out of my mouth. Get that hook out of my mouth. We're not going to own a power of judgment. We're not really going to own it to what it's by calling it the power of judgment, because there's too many negative connotations attached to the word judgment. You ever heard that? He's full of righteous judgment. Right? Well, if they were saying that as the word was intended, it was he judges rightly, because the word righteous actually means to use rightly. But we've perverted the word and the connotation of the word to where it's now a criticism to be exercising righteous judgment. Why? Because it implies that someone's using their critical powers of judgment and discernment before speaking. The world doesn't really encourage that, quite frankly. The world wants to shout you down with different kinds of opinions and memes and all these different kinds of things that jockey for, a place in our consciousness, want to take up space. My opinion is that I think we need to be aware of that. I think we need to be able to, that when we're observing that, when we're having that experience, that we just need to be constantly aware that that's what's going on. Instead of being unconsciously aware, being, following, liking this and liking that and so forth, and kind of following it all around. And before you know it, there's a bunch of people flaming on your page, raising hell with each other.
Yeah.
Over who's right. Me, I decided a long time ago I'd rather be happy than right. I like being right and happy, don't get me wrong. But if I had to choose between the two, I'd rather be happy. So if you have some truth that will help me to be happier, I am all about it. All about it. Now, next month, we're going to continue this discussion, be the 10th month. And next month, we're going to be talking about, I'm trying to decide between the spiritual power of zeal or the spiritual power of strength, which are two of the ones that we haven't done yet. I'm thinking that, October and the fall and all that kind of, I love the fall, so I'm thinking that it's going to be on the spiritual power of zeal. I'm already feeling excited about the fall. I don't know about y'all, but the fall is my favorite time of the year. I love it. That first morning when you wake up after the summer has just tipped over and you wake up that first morning and you feel like, ooh, I should have put a sweater on today. I like that morning. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be upon us probably by the next time I see y'all, because I'm not seeing y'all until late October. Next month it's going to be about 6 or 7 weeks before I'm back here. So I want to thank you for your attention. I'll be around here if anybody has any questions, comments about any of this. I'd love to hear from you. Ed, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ed's always the first one I see when I get here. So like I said, just regular as clockwork. I love it. I love to come here. I look forward to seeing y'all again next month. Thank y'all very much. Namaste.